Hi guys, it's the Island Girl and I'm back with another reaction video for you today. And today I'm reacting to how England created the modern world. History they won't teach you. So we're going to get right into this one. So if you're new here, welcome. Thank you for clicking on this video. Hope you give it a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. To all my regular schmeglers, day one, city pools, come on in, right back and let's check this one out together. Please let me know your request in the comment section. You can write it or you can drop your link. I'll get it done. Here we go right about now.
The greatest people on earth. Cue God Save the Queen.
These rustics are so inept. Nearly takes the honor out of victory. Nearly.
Our England, the land of kings, queens, and the people who invented civilization as you know it. We gave you law, science, literature, and a language so good, you all decided to speak it. We built an empire so vast, even the sun refused to clock out. Without us, you'd have no Shakespeare, no Newton, no Tolkien, no tea, and absolutely no clue how to organize a queue. And yet, despite all this undeniable greatness, some people still try to pretend we're not the best thing to ever happen to the world. To them, we say, you're welcome.
You gotta be honest with this one. I know we just started, but England has done so much for the world. The English language is a prime example. Different forms of inventions are a prime example for what they have contributed for so many years and things that we're using in modern time. And like he said, a lot of people won't give you guys your flowers, but you indeed deserve it, because without you, I don't know where this world would have been for such a small listen. Let's continue.
The Crusades, one of history's most misrepresented events. If you listen to modern academics, you'd think the English and their European neighbours simply woke up one day, grabbed their swords, and decided to pillage the Middle East for fun. What they never mention is that the Crusades were not unprovoked. They were a response. For over 400 years, Islamic armies had been expanding relentlessly, swallowing up North Africa, Spain, and much of the Byzantine Empire. Christian lands fell one after another, with their populations forced to convert, pay heavy taxes, or worse. Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, had been under Muslim rule since 637 AD, and Christian pilgrims were regularly robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. So, in 1095, Pope Urban II finally had enough. He called for a crusade, a counterattack, and Europe answered the call. As historian Thomas F. Madden put it, the Crusades were in every way a defensive war. They were a direct response to Muslim aggression. While the French led the first few Crusades as inefficiently as possible, it wasn't long before England got involved. And when we did it properly. No one did it better than King Richard the Lionheart. Richard wasn't just a king, he was a force of nature. A man who spent barely 6 months of his reign in England because he was too busy crushing armies abroad. During the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, he faced off against Saladin, one of the greatest Muslim generals in history. At the Battle of Arsuf, Richard personally led a cavalry charge so devastating that it sent Saladin's forces running. Even when outnumbered, Richard simply refused to lose. He was so effective that Saladin began to admire him, and when Richard fell ill, Saladin sent him ice and fruit, because nothing says "I respect you" like a medieval fruit basket.
What? So that's how the Crusades started? Guys, I've never heard this before. It's my first time looking into this, but I'm glad I'm watching this video today. Look at that. Can you imagine this amount of respect that the enemy has for you, that he sent you fruit and ice when you felt ill? That's crazy.
Richard wasn't just a warrior, he was a master diplomat. At one point, while negotiating peace, he casually suggested to Saladin's brother, Why don't I just marry your sister and we call it a truce? When swords didn't work, Richard was happy to settle things with a royal wedding. But the Crusades weren't just about fighting, they reshaped Europe. Crusaders brought back medicine, science, philosophy, and engineering, sparking the Renaissance.
Oh, wow.
Trade exploded, linking Europe to Silk Road goods, exotic spices, and new technologies. Warfare itself evolved as European armies adopted advanced siege tactics, cavalry formations, and new battlefield strategies. Of course, modern critics love to moan about Crusader brutality, as if medieval warfare was some polite tea party before the Christians showed up. The reality? Every major civilization was fighting, conquering, and expanding. The Muslim armies had been doing the same for centuries, and they weren't exactly known for playing nice either. Saladin massacred prisoners of war, just as Richard did when he executed 3,000 Muslim captives at Acre after Saladin refused to honor a peace deal. And if you...
What? Oh, man. But he's right. Everybody was fighting. Ugh.
You want real brutality, look at the Mongols, who around the same time flattened entire cities, executed millions, and wiped civilizations off the map. Compared to them, the Crusaders were practically charitable missionaries. Historian Rodney Stark summed it up best. The Crusaders were not the unprovoked aggressors. Muslim invaders had been attacking Christian lands for centuries. Let's get this straight. The Crusades weren't some wild European invasion. They were a response to centuries of Islamic conquest. King Richard the Lionheart was an absolute legend, and the Crusades expanded trade, shaped Europe, and helped spark the Renaissance. And if anyone's still upset about them, it's been 900 years. Maybe it's time to move on. Cheers, me old cocker.
Wow. So they're not the one who started. They were the one that tried to end by protecting. So, like he said, they were just a set of barbaric just going about and doing stuff, the Crusaders. That's not what their deal was. Because you don't really hear that. You hear that they were just vicious and just going about and doing all manner of evil. Wow.
The founding of Australia, or how England sent its criminals on holiday and accidentally created a nation. In 1788, England looked at its overflowing prisons, sighed deeply, and decided, right, let's send them somewhere far away. And thus Australia was born, not through grand conquest nor noble settlement, but by shipping off convicts to the other side of the world and hoping for the best. The first fleet, under Captain Arthur Phillip, arrived in Botany Bay, carrying a wonderful selection of thieves, forgers, and petty criminals, or, as they would later be called, Australians. It was a journey of brutal conditions, dysentery, and possibly the worst travel experience in history. Yet against all odds, they survived, built a colony, and somehow turned a prison camp into one of the most successful nations on Earth.
Are you serious? That is how Australia started? With criminals sent there? What? Are you serious? Like, I did not know. Wow.
Historian Robert Hughes, in his book The Fatal Shore, described it as a society born out of the sheer resilience of the unwanted. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and kangaroos. The treatment of Aboriginal people remains a dark chapter, and life for early settlers was harsh, unforgiving, and occasionally involved wrestling giant spiders. But what started as an accidental experiment in exile evolved into a country of unstoppable determination, resourcefulness, and a talent for making everything sound like a question.
Wow.
So while Australians today like to joke about their convict past, they should also remember, without England's habit of exporting its criminals, there would be no Australia. You're welcome. America, the land of the free, home of the brave, and a country that never misses an opportunity to shout,
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms,
as if it was the year civilization began. But here's the awkward truth. America was, for all intents and purposes, an English project. Now, yes, the Spanish technically landed first, wandering into Florida and parts of the Southwest before deciding that Conquistadoring in Latin America was far more profitable. But they didn't exactly build the United States, did they? No, that job fell to the English, who arrived in 1607 at Jamestown and then again in 1620 on the Mayflower, bringing English laws, customs, and most importantly, the ability to form a proper queue.
That I'm aware of. That I'm definitely aware of, bringing what the different laws and setting up, you understand, a system where you can function. That's how America started. I'm still in shock about Australia. Wow. Man.
At first, it wasn't exactly a thriving success. The Jamestown settlers nearly starved to death because they spent more time arguing about leadership than actually planting crops.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Pilgrims, those miserable Puritans who fled England because they found the Church of England too much fun, stumbled into Massachusetts and proceeded to have an absolutely grim time. Half of them died in the first winter, which probably explains why they were so thankful the next year. But despite the hardships, the English stubbornness kicked in. They built farms, towns, and eventually a society that looked suspiciously like England, only with worse weather and a lot more wooden houses. Who landed there? The English. Who built the first successful colonies? The English. Who established the legal system, language, and institutions? The English.
Wow.
By the 1700s, English North America had transformed into a thriving set of colonies, filled with hard-working farmers, grumpy merchants, and people who still considered tea an essential part of daily life. It was here that American culture really began to take shape. And spoiler alert, it was mostly just English culture with a bit of local flavor. The legal system, English common law, the economy, English trade networks, the class system, still very English, rich landowners at the top, poor laborers at the bottom, everyone else somewhere in between. Even after the great breakup of 1776, America couldn't help but keep copying England. The founding fathers, those so-called revolutionaries, didn't exactly reinvent the wheel. Instead, they took centuries of English political thought, added a few dramatic speeches, and called it a republic. Historian Daniel Hannan summed it up best. The American Revolution was less a rebellion against England than a demand to be ruled in a more English way. And yet, despite all this, Americans loved to act as if they sprang fully formed from the ground in 1776, completely ignoring the centuries of English governance, law, and culture that shaped their country.
So this was one thing that I saw in a video the other day, and it clicked in my head that they did not give England the due respect or their due in saying, listen, that because of their input, they have shaped the way of life that America was building upon. You understand? Their laws, their cultural thing. With a little twist, that's how America ended up changing. But when you look at it, though, a lot of the things are taken from the English side, because so many things that you see and do today, they are still similar to what the Brits does. Wow.
Let's also not forget that after all the dramatic speeches, declarations, and flag waving, America immediately went and copied England's entire system, from common law to individual rights, and even kept English as their language.
Wow.
Because let's be honest, what were they going to do? Speak French? So the next time an American bangs on about how they heroically threw off the shackles of English rule, just remind them, without England, there would be no America. You're still English, whether you like it or not. England's role in ending the slave trade. And yes, we paid for it too. Slavery, one of humanity's oldest, ugliest, and most universal institutions. But if you listen to certain people today, you'd think England invented it over afternoon tea.
Yep.
The reality, everyone has been enslaved at some point. The Romans enslaved the Celts, the Vikings enslaved the English, and the Barbary pirates raided English and Irish coasts for centuries, dragging over 1 million white Europeans into slavery. The Ottomans forced Christian boys into their armies, while African kingdoms sold their own people into the global slave trade. And yet when slavery is discussed today, the Anglo-American alliance always gets the blame. England was also the first nation to put an end to it. Enter William Wilberforce, a man who fought for decades to abolish the trade despite being heckled, mocked, and threatened. In 1807, his efforts paid off. The Abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed. But England didn't just ban slavery, we hunted it down and destroyed it. The Royal Navy's West Africa Squadron spent 50 years intercepting slave ships, freeing over 150,000 slaves, and often fighting against the very nations still trading in human lives. This was one of the most expensive humanitarian missions in history, but England paid the price, literally. Because England is charmingly bureaucratic, the government decided to compensate slave owners for their losses. Yes, even while doing the right thing, England had to be polite about it. The cost? The equivalent of £17 billion today. A loan so massive that British taxpayers only finished paying it off in 2015. And yet, despite all this, England is still the villain in every conversation about slavery. The Ottomans continued using slaves for decades. The French dragged their feet on abolition. And today, slavery still exists. Not in England, but in India, China, Africa, and the Middle East. Yet somehow nobody's demanding reparations from Saudi Arabia or the descendants of African kings who sold their own people. Historian Andrew Roberts put it best: no other nation in history has ever spent so much blood and treasure to end slavery, not just within its own borders, but across the entire world. But does anyone say thank you? So, to sum up, slavery existed everywhere. England was one of the first to abolish it. We spent a fortune ending it worldwide, and if anyone disagrees, they're probably complaining in English on the internet using laws and freedoms that England pioneered. Thank you, Squire.
This a big one that I have to talk about, and England does not get its due when it comes on to slavery. This one hits. If you haven't seen the video that I've reacted to, the crusade against England's crusade against slavery, please check it out. I'll link it right here, or right here, whichever side it is. But my eyes were open. I could not believe it. I was in shock. I was like, are you serious? Because this is not taught in school. You know, it's not stressed upon. Because you always hear how vicious and cruel England was when it come on to slavery. And it's like, yeah, like he said, they get the blame. And I got to find out that they just finished paying, like he said, in 2015. This was 10 years ago. That is crazy. Worth up to $17 billion to slave. And it's crazy. Nobody has talked about any other country, but England always, and I repeat, always get a bad rap when it comes on to this. And it's crazy, and it's still going on today, and nobody complain about that stuff. But I will say to you today, my respects and my thanks to you, because if it wasn't for you, and I and my foreparents couldn't be in the position that they are today. So my respects and my hat to you, England, for everything that you have done. Gratitude, so much. I have so much gratitude to you for that. And I don't get, this is the thing that I don't get with people. Why do you continue to complain? Go and read, go and get the truth. Because if I wasn't blaming, but I was not aware of the truth. And it baffles me. Like, why would you not put this in books? Why would you not put this in the school system for other nations and other people to know that this is what took place? Man, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Literacy, education, and cultural influence, or how England taught the world to read, think, and tell a proper story. Language is power, and no language has shaped the world quite like English.
True.
Once Latin ruled knowledge and French dictated diplomacy, but then English arrived. Rich, flexible, expressive, and utterly unstoppable. Today, whether you're sealing deals in Tokyo, coding in Silicon Valley, or debating in Oxford, you're doing it in English. And who do we have to thank for this? The storytellers, the playwrights, the dreamers. First there was Shakespeare, the man who practically invented modern storytelling, gifting the world with Hamlet, Macbeth, and a few hundred words and phrases people still use without realizing. George Bernard Shaw put it best: Shakespeare is the happy hunting ground of all minds that have lost their balance. Then came Jane Austen, whose wit and social insight defined romance for centuries, and J.R.R. Tolkien, who sat in his study and created an entire world.
What started it? There must have been a point at which quite suddenly, like God, you chose to make the world like that.
I was going to use that illustration. I don't have his lesson. Because, as I've said elsewhere, I think that if you wish to push me back into what semi-theological or philosophical, I think because being made by a creator, one of our natural factors is wishing to create. But since we aren't creators, we have to sub-create. Let's say we have to rearrange the primary material in some particular form which pleases us, which it isn't necessarily a moral pleasing, it's partly an aesthetic pleasing.
Then you make this distinction between what pleases aesthetically because it's balanced and what pleases morally. God, we may assume, made a moral rather than an aesthetic choice. Is this too great an assumption?
It's one that required a very long time to debate, but I should have thought that we are dealing with something which we're only looking at facets of one whole, but certainly an aesthetic whole is surely. An aesthetic facet is as strongly to be predicated as a moral one.
With The Lord of the Rings, he didn't just write a story, he forged a legend. Without him, there would be no modern fantasy, no cinematic epics, and certainly no endless internet debates about elves and dwarves. Beyond literature, England's education system shaped the greatest minds of the modern age. Oxford and Cambridge have been producing world-changing intellects for over 800 years.
Wow.
And English schools became the blueprint for universities across the globe. Even those who claim to resist English culture still end up embracing it. From Shakespearean tragedy to Dickensian critique, from Hogwarts to Middle-earth, England's literary and intellectual legacy is inescapable. So, if you've ever read a novel, quoted Shakespeare, or found yourself lost in Middle-earth, then, my dear friends, you're welcome. The agriculture...
Can you imagine that? What an contribution! Of everything that you have listed so far, what a contribution! Unforgettable. It should be on the mouth and the lips of everyone, because if it wasn't for them doing all this and their input, where would the world be today? And it is factual. Stop and think about it for a second, guys. Remarkable.
Cultural revolution, or how England figured out farming and accidentally fed the world. The agricultural revolution, not exactly the stuff of grand speeches or glorious battles, but arguably one of the most world-changing things England ever did. For centuries, the average English peasant toiled from dawn to dusk, scratching out just enough food to not die. No tractors, no fridges, no efficiency, just endless labor and the constant threat of famine. And yet some people today throw around the term white privilege like our ancestors were lounging in mansions sipping tea. In reality, the vast majority were dirt poor, disease-ridden, and one bad harvest away from total ruin. But then England did what England does best. We started thinking, enter Jethro Tull, yes, like the band. In 1701, he invented the seed drill, which meant farmers could finally plant seeds properly instead of flinging them around like idiots. This massively increased crop yields and, shockingly, helped stop people from starving. Then there was Charles Turnip Townshend, who realized that instead of destroying soil by planting the same crops over and over, rotating them could keep the land fertile and boost food production. Revolutionary. And let's not forget Robert Bakewell, the man who basically invented selective breeding. Instead of letting livestock reproduce at random like drunk teenagers, he bred the biggest, strongest animals, leading to fatter cows, tastier pigs, and more food for everyone.
Wow.
Well, except the animals. These innovations completely transformed farming. Suddenly, England wasn't just barely surviving, we were feeding entire populations. And because we're nice like that, we exported these ideas across the world where other nations promptly copied them and acted like they thought of it first. Historian Mark Overton called it the most remarkable transformation of farming in human history. And he was right. Of course, it wasn't all good news. The Enclosure Acts reorganized land, making farming more efficient, but also forced thousands of rural workers into cities, where they became factory laborers in the Industrial Revolution. Imagine being a 12-year-old orphan working 14-hour shifts in a soot-covered factory, coughing up your lungs only to be told centuries later that you were actually privileged. This suffering built the modern world. The food surpluses from the agricultural revolution fueled population growth, industrial progress, and medical advancements. Without it, society would still be trapped in the endless cycle of famine and survival. So next time someone whines about how privileged the English were, just remind them our ancestors were breaking their backs in fields, living in squalor, and working themselves to the bone so that the world could eat. And if anyone's still unimpressed, they can try living without modern agriculture and see how long they last.
True.
What would you lot do without us? The rule of law.
Man, from agriculture to literature to listen, man, to ending our slavery for rules and laws. All of these that he's pointed out is so spot on. Can you imagine crop rotation so that the soil can continue to give its best? Breeding between animal the strong. Oh, listen. That is crazy. Multiple seeder to help to plant seeds instead of sowing it again. All these were invented by. Ooh. But he's right. When you start to say privilege, think about the ancestors who made all this happen, who are working on the brink of starvation, and to come up with all these innovations and all these rules and all these laws and stuff to ensure that its people have a better life, and then giving it out to the world without charge, and then the world, other countries taking it and pretending as if they came up with the idea. That's crazy. You gotta give England its due. Wow.
Or how England invented the idea that kings shouldn't do whatever the hell they want.
This is
the Magna Carta, the document that changed history, mainly because a bunch of angry English barons got fed up with King John being a complete pillock. In 1215, after years of John taxing everyone into oblivion, losing wars he probably shouldn't have started, and generally being a royal disaster, England's nobles decided they'd had enough. They cornered him at Runnymede, shoved a document under his nose, and essentially said, "Sign this or else." And just like that, the divine right of kings took a serious hit. Now, to be fair, the Magna Carta wasn't an immediate victory for democracy. John, being a slippery little weasel, tried to wriggle out of it the moment the ink dried. But the idea had been planted. Even the king wasn't above the law. Historian Winston Churchill, before he bankrupted Britain, called it the foundation of principles that have sustained freedom and justice. Of course, the French, being French, took a different approach to limiting royal power. They waited another 600 years, then solved the problem with a guillotine. But England, ever the civilized lot, preferred a well-worded contract. The Magna Carta paved the way for common law, trial by jury, and eventually parliamentary democracy. America even nicked the idea when writing its own constitution. And today, its influence can be seen in legal systems worldwide. So, to sum up, England invented a modern concept of law and justice, and the rest of the world copied us. You're welcome. The British Empire. The empire.
Man, I tell you, the Magna Carta, I learned about this maybe a year now or into almost a year now, and I was like, can you imagine making a law that not even the king is above? Huh? It just blows my mind to see so much of what England has done. And yes, it still spill over into America, where the Constitution was written because of this same. But look what he said. Look at the French. A guillotine was used, not a law, but a different approach. 600 years. It is just, it's just amazing. Like I said, contribution that England had given to this world, man. It's mind-boggling. It's crazy that you do not get the credit that is due to you. That's all I can say. England's role in building the British Empire. Here we go again.
Is so big that the sun never set on it, mostly because England had taken so much land that the sun physically couldn't escape. But how did this little island full of tea-drinking, rain-soaked, slightly grumpy people end up ruling a quarter of the planet? Well, like all good English things, the empire started almost by accident. Back in the late 16th century, Spain and Portugal were busy grabbing land left, right and centre, filling their coffers with gold and generally annoying England in the process. Enter Sir Francis Drake, a man who was technically a pirate, but since he stole for England, we just called him an explorer. He sailed around the world, nicked Spanish treasure, and helped England establish itself as a force to be reckoned with.
Man.
And the Queen loved it. Elizabeth I, being the wonderfully bold and slightly terrifying woman that she was, thought, if the Spanish and Portuguese can have an empire, why the bloody hell can't we? And so England embarked on the most ambitious real estate project in history. By the 18th and 19th centuries, England was running a quarter of the world's population and most of the planet's trade. India, Canada, Australia, chunks of Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East. You name it, England had a hand in it. And no, not everyone asked for it, but details. Now, before people start clutching their pearls, let's get something straight. The empire wasn't just about taking over and bossing people around.
Nope.
Though, let's be honest, the English are exceptionally good at that. It fundamentally changed the modern world. It was England that created the global trade network, introducing everything from tea and railways to cricket and bureaucracy. It was England that spread the English language, which, let's be real, has saved millions from the horror of trying to conduct international business in German.
Schweizer Fernsehen, Rundschau. Ja, ich komme aus Deutschland. Ich merke mal gut.
Yes, there were problems. Yes, some parts of the empire were a bit heavy-handed. But the fact remains the world as we know it would not exist without England's empire.
Yeah.
Just ask Niall Ferguson, the historian who said, more than any other, the British Empire changed the world's trajectory, bringing law, commerce and order. Or take it from Indian historian Nirad Chowdhury, who admitted, had it not been for the English, India would still be a collection of feuding princely states. And then we get to the final act, the downfall. You see, the problem with building the...
See? Man, like I tell you, I said, this is what it all boils down to. It's not that in every country or everywhere that they go, yes, they're going to have persons who do things that they're not supposed to. But at the end of the day, them going out is not... Some place didn't want it, but... what did they go there for? To rule and to just set rules like an iron fist and say this is not? No. To set up government and set things in place that they can strive or survive as a country. Can you imagine the British Empire taking up? Listen, so many places invaded. I was shocked out of my wits when I watched that video. And I'm like, what in the world? Man,
the biggest empire in history, is that eventually you have to pay for it.
Yep.
And nothing kills an empire faster than war. By the time World War II rolled around, England was already stretched thin.
Yep.
And then along came Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill, a man who could barely function without a bottle of brandy in one hand and a cigar in the other, was, for some reason, hailed as the saviour of Britain.
Huh.
Never mind that he bungled military strategies left, right and centre, or that he plunged England into irrecoverable debt, ensuring that the empire would collapse faster than one of his drunken speeches. By the time he'd finished recklessly throwing money at World War II, England was completely, utterly skint, bankrupt, in the red, owned by the Americans.
Oh.
We weren't just broke, we were practically a glorified US client state, forced to beg for loans from the very people we had once ruled over. And when you're that deep in debt, you can't exactly keep an empire running. India got its independence in 1947, followed by most of the empire over the next few decades. The final symbolic moment came in 1997, when England handed Hong Kong back to China, which, looking at China now, might have been a questionable decision. So, was the British Empire perfect? Of course not. Did England make mistakes? Absolutely.
Yes.
But did England shape the modern world more than any other nation in history?
Yes.
Yes, it did. You're welcome.
Yes. Yes, it did indeed. Indeed it did. It's an amazing video to sit here and watch and learn so much. Shape the world, modern day world today as we know it. So much contribution came out of England. Like I said, all the different inventions, all the different laws, languages. Hey, beautiful. What's the matter? What a great video. Yes, England definitely has created the modern world. It has made so much contribution from agriculture to literature to like you said, English as it is, causing trade between the end of slavery. There's so many things that has been done. Their imprint is everywhere. Their footprint is everywhere. Amazing. My hats and respect to you all. Because we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for England. It's that simple. Okay. It's your island girl, and I'm running out of here. I hope you guys enjoy this one. Don't forget to be good, be kind. Oh, pretty lips. Be safe out there. Okay, guys? Leave your link in the comment section below. I got you. Catch you guys in another one. Bye.